It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life. From the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators. The famous and not so famous. The controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here is Douglas Coleman.
Well, hello there. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are you? We got a good interview today. We got one that was one of those that I kind of like, where you just get started and boom, the hour is up. And you don't feel like you've actually finished the conversation. My guest is Richard Neal, who is an actor, originally from New York City, and a graduate of the Neighborhood Playhouse. He's got a film out now called Prodigy, which we do talk about somewhat in the interview, although we did go off on many tangents talking about actors and old films, and he's another film geek like me. And hopefully he'll come back to the show at some point, because I would really like to talk to him again and continue the conversation. We don't have a lot of time to do chit-chat at the beginning of the show here, because the interview, like I said, ran long, and I hate editing good content. So without further ado, we will be right back after these commercial messages with Richard Neal.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Go listen, download, and subscribe to The Douglas Coleman Show. It's available at the website douglascolemanmusic.com/DCS. Also on iTunes, Spreaker, and YouTube. The Douglas Coleman Show is an internationally syndicated talk and music show that features fascinating and sometimes famous guests from all aspects of the entertainment industry. The topics can range from light and fluffy to sober and serious. Our focus is on music artists, but we also feature producers, authors, directors, and even promoters. The Douglas Coleman Show. Sometimes chat, sometimes music, always entertaining. Again, it's available today at the website douglascolemanmusic.com/DCS. You can also connect with them on Facebook at Douglas Coleman Show 1, follow on Twitter at Douglas Coleman 3, and you can even find them on TuneIn Radio. Again, that's the Douglas Coleman Show at the website douglascolemanmusic.com/DCS, iTunes, Spreaker, YouTube, and more. Go listen, download, subscribe, and share with your social networks today.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians, and everyone else, to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. The pledge asks signees to commit to 12 behaviors that research in behavioral science shows lead to truthfulness, such as clarifying one's opinions and the facts, citing one's sources, and celebrating people who update their beliefs toward the truth. Private citizens who sign the pledge get the benefit of contributing to a more truth-oriented society. Public figures get more substantive rewards for signing the pledge in the form of positive media and public recognition. The pledge crowdsources the truth by asking volunteers to evaluate the statements of public figures who sign the pledge. Take the pledge, demand that your elected representatives do so, and encourage your friends to take it at protruthpledge.org.
After the loss of my dog Mandy, I had difficulty sleeping. She had been my best friend for years. She slept on the end of my bed, and I found her snoring soothing. It was difficult for me, as I also found little support for my grief. Not being able to sleep was the worst. I decided to create an audiobook to help people like me. Listen to my voice as you drift into a peaceful sleep, taking a journey using your dog's memories, accompanied by rain falling, birds singing, and a waterfall. To get your download, go to Amazon and search Relax by Jane Yates. Thanks to Douglas Coleman for this spot.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps from the UK, record producer, engineer. You might have heard of me. I've worked with artists from Elton John to Led Zeppelin to Bad Company, Twisted Sister, Robbie Williams, Oasis, many, many great bands and artists in the past and the present and hopefully in the future. But you can work with me as well. You know, all you got to do is get in touch with me on eppsmusicproductions.com. That's EPPsproductionsmusic.com. And I can help you with your productions and with your recordings. A lot of people do home recordings now, which you can only take so far. Maybe they need a bit of professional help. So get in touch with me and we can sort it out. And thanks for Douglas Coleman for giving me this spot. Thanks a lot. Cheers, bye.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Richard Neal. Hi, Richard, how are you?
Great, Douglas. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on. I watched the movie Prodigy, and I tell you, I really liked it. I really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
And
good.
I want to talk about that as well. But before we get to that, if you could just give people a little bit of a background on yourself, where you came from and what you've been doing with your life, and then we'll talk about the film.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm originally from the Bronx, New York City, and then a suburb in Jersey, and then I went to university in UC Santa Barbara. I went to professional training school in Manhattan, in Neighborhood Playhouse. Studied with Sandy Meisner there. Playhouse is quite well known, going back many years. People like Gregory Peck to Robert Duvall to Diane Keaton all graduated from there. And then I studied at several other places, HP Studios in Manhattan, ACT in San Francisco. And I started off doing theater in Manhattan. Came out here, did a little TV work to Los Angeles, and then I was part of a theater repertory company outside of Charleston, South Carolina for about 5 years, where I toured performing classic roles like Stanley Kowalski in Streetcar Named Desire, which I did for almost a year on and off, and other roles in teaching, acting as well. So I did my sort of repertory theater phase of my life, and then came back out here, Los Angeles. I have a family, a daughter who's about to go into her senior year in high school, so we're checking out colleges now. So I've gotten into doing voice acting in video games last several years, which has been a lot of fun. And I find also it goes back to a sort of a repertory theater type experience where we're working with a diverse group of actors and creating a team, and it tends to be very theatrical as well, a lot of these games, and you get to use your voice. And so out here in Los Angeles, doing the acting thing, everything there is, do TV, independent films, and infomercials and industrial films and video games, a lot of video games. So that's a capsule summary of my life.
What made you want to be an actor? What was it that sparked you?
What made me want to be an actor?
Yeah.
I guess it's never wanting to grow up and never wanting to be fully responsible, always being a child in many ways. It's just like, I grew up watching a lot of movies, especially the early gangster, Jimmy Cagney, Bogart, John Garfield type films. And as a kid growing up in New York, you're sort of romanticized this tough guy. And I thought Cagney just was always phenomenal and could do everything, be a song and dance man, could play emotional scenes and still be the guy you'd never mess with. And he had such a charm about him. So I think he was something about him that seemed so versatile and just brilliant, playing George M. Cohn and that famous film escapes me now. And then, playing the tough guy roles and Yankee Doodle.
Yankee Doodle. I was just, yeah. I got it the same time you did. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of film. And then later on when I remember seeing Brando and On the Waterfront, and that blowing my mind completely, saying this is a acting of another order, and what is this guy doing? And it just seemed so. I mean, if you could do that, if you could be that, have that kind of impact emotionally on the audience, and that be that compelling as a performer, I just thought it would be just a lot of fun. So it starts as a concept, in your brain when you're a little kid. You say, "Wow, I would love to do with that." Aside from it starts as an idea. I mean, it would be a blast to be able to do that. And so you have the idea and then you try to make it happen.
It's funny you said James Cagney, because somebody like him is kind of a lost art these days. Yeah. I don't know of anybody who could do everything that he could do.
Man of 1,000 Faces, playing Lon Chaney. I know it's true. It's true. When you think of a person, I raised my daughter as a total film geek, and I see films like, when we got into this recently with some friends, and they were going crazy over La La Land, and it's amazing how much the younger generation. I feel so old now, but most of the people I'm working with now are in their 20s or barely into their 30s, and they've never seen Singing in the Rain. And I'm saying, you watch a movie like Singing in the Rain or West Side Story, and you compare that to La La Land. I mean, Singing in the Rain, Gene Kelly is a guy,
right,
to be able to sing and dance and the professionalism and the perfectionism of Gene Kelly. It just raises the bar as far as what an actor is capable of doing. And it's true. It's true. It's very few people who can be that triple threat, who can do the song and dance and as well be compelling emotionally and also be dramatically as compelling as possible.
If you think of some of the tough guy actors now, I mean, to even imagine them doing a song and dance is...
Like Tom Hardy. Let's see Tom Hardy do a song and dance. It's true. There are people, I was thinking of La La Land, and I hate to go back because cinematically, the film, the shooting, the photography of that film is amazing. But I was saying, what if we cast that film? I go into this mode as an actor. I go, what if we recast it as older actors and have Hugh Jackman and Jennifer, what's her name, J-Lo, do it? Who can actually sing and dance?
Right.
Actors who can actually sing and dance, and make it more of a realistic portrait of struggling actors and struggling musicians. And maybe they don't quite make it to the upper echelons of stardom, but perhaps they just make their living and they find true love, and they still love their art form. I just think it would be a more accurate. And I pitched that idea to some younger filmmakers I know, and they said, well, people want that fantasy world. They want to have that fantasy world of people making it to the height of stardom. But I think it would be, Jennifer Lopez and Hugh Jackman, who can both sing and dance. I think it would be amazing to see people who can really do that work,
Right, exactly. Well, even the title Song and Dance Man is kind of a dated title. you don't hear that label put on too many people anymore.
Right. It's true. I mean, Nathan Lane. I mean, you have to look at the people on Broadway, I guess. I mean,
right.
We saw American in Paris a few years ago on Broadway, and I thought the fellow, get his name, he was terrific doing the Gene Kelly role. Just wonderful. And I guess he's not a name as far as film and TV goes, but you look at someone like that, I think he could possibly pull it off. But it's that skill set doesn't seem to be that needed anymore. They don't really make musicals for the cinema.
No, and I haven't seen anything that even required somebody like that. If there was any kind of a scene where they had dancing or something, they would just bring in a bunch of dancers.
Right. And that's the crazy thing about watching those Fred Astaire films, is that he shot all of his dance sequences in one take. I mean, it was like a continuous master. I mean, Ginger Rogers talks about that. They would rehearse nonstop for a full week, and they would shoot the whole thing. I mean, those films, I mean, the dance sequences in those Astaire Rogers films are just phenomenal. And they, I remember, I think Gene Kelly was interviewed about that. And, Madonna was capable of dancing, but a lot of it is all cut up. It's all spliced together in these different, but to watch one whole dance sequence in one continuous 3-minute shot is incredible.
Well, Madonna's a pretty good example, although she's even dated at this point. But she could act really well. And she could dance and she could sing.
Right.
So she certainly could do it. And she still looks pretty damn good for her age at this point. Right.
I agree with you. And I think someone like Jennifer Lopez or, it's possible. I mean, there's obviously incredible talent out there. You watch the Grammy Awards or the music videos. I mean, they're obviously, I don't know if Bruno Mars can act, but they're obviously very talented singers and dancers out there who are hoofing it, who can really maintain that kind of energy. I mean, they're out there.
Yeah. You know who I thought was a pretty competent actor, too, was Eminem.
Oh, yeah.
In 8 Mile. I thought he did a real hell of a good job with that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I wonder why no one else has tried to get him, or maybe they have, but why he doesn't pursue that.
I mean, he seems like he's semi-retired at this point. I don't think he does much of anything anymore,
It's interesting. It's funny. I was watching this Patrick Stewart show yesterday, the one that's on Stars called, what's it called? Blunt Talk. And Moby is in that. As an actor.
Moby. Oh, wow.
Moby. Yeah, Mr. Silver Lake here in L.A. lives in it's very interesting because he plays a preschool music teacher, but he plays himself as the music teacher. He's Moby. It's very weird. Anyway, the nod to Moby here.
Yeah, okay.
Very L.A. moment here, watching Moby. And it's weird because Patrick Stewart's ex-wife, who's the mother of his child, who's an African-American woman, is dating. He visits the preschool. He has this much younger ex-wife who has a 5-year-old. So he goes to the preschool. He's the only one who doesn't know who Moby is. So he makes these lame jokes about Moby. That's his name, Moby Dick. Moby Dick. What is that? Did he come up with that name? And so then he figures out how to do Skype or FaceTime with his young son. And Moby's there on the FaceTime and says, and the people at his newsroom where he works says, "Is that Moby? Moby's there? Moby?"
The only thing I can remember about Moby was that he had Mick Jagger's moves.
Oh, did he?
Unless I'm confusing him with somebody else. He's the one from Iceland?
No.
Moby's not from Iceland.
He's L.A.
Oh.
He's from Iceland. I don't know, except for Bjork.
That's the one. Okay, sorry. I got that. I'm getting those two confused.
One word. Yeah, Bjork's a woman.
Bjork's a woman? No, not that one.
Bjork?
No, not that one. This was a guy, small, skinny guy, who danced around like the funky chicken like Mick Jagger. had the
Perhaps
shaggy haircut.
I don't think so. He's a vegetarian who has this vegan restaurant here in Silver Lake, I believe.
Oh, I don't know who the hell I'm thinking of then.
Okay. Well, maybe one of your listeners will let us know if you're talking.
Anyways, let's talk about your film.
We're two film geeks that we can talk about film forever and not talk about anything
I'm sure
else.
we could, yeah. Well, it was funny. I'll give you a little quick background. I studied acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Art.
Oh, wow. Spencer Tracy's school.
In New York. But I dropped out because I was more interested in being a rock and roll musician.
Oh, wow. So,
I enjoyed just performing. And to me, it was kind of one and the same, acting or music, whatever. But my heart was with music.
Yeah.
So when I hooked up with the band, I left the school and, needless to say, the band didn't work out anyways. But I have been in that environment. So I'm certainly a fan of actors and movies.
Most actors want to be rock and rollers, I think. That's what they say.
Yeah, that's funny, because like Johnny Depp has a band and Keanu Reeves has a band. I mean, half of those guys are musicians.
Sam Shepard started off in a band, too. Sam Shepard, playwright, actor,
right.
Started off with a band. Let's say we knew Patti Smith and toured with Bob Dylan on the Rolling Thunder tour and wrote a book about it. But I think they all wanted to be Bob Dylan or Springsteen or, Mick Jagger. Everyone wants to be that star on stage because it seems like it's the most, when I watch people like that who are so, it just seems like the most expressive, the most dynamic thing you can possibly do as a performer is to be a singer on stage. I think that's true. I think, and Peter Brook, the great British director, tried to do that with, he found opera singers. Because, and Stanislavski would talk about that. Opera was really the culmination of all the great performing arts. You have dance, you have acting, and you have singing. And if you can have all of them done at the highest level, if you could have Brando quality actors, Placido Domingo type singers, and Baryshnikov type dancers all combined in one person.
Oh my God.
That would be the Superman of performing arts. And so he tried to do that in these sort of actorish operatic performances where he found opera singers who could act and actors who can sing, and he put together these theater productions,
And the comedic timing of Jack Benny.
Right.
Throw all that in there. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get back to your film now. Since we keep going off on tangents here.
I have a problem with that. You can talk to my wife about that.
Oh, that's all right.
I go off on tangents.
Tangents are real good for radio shows. They really are because people follow it. And then at the end of it, as long as you can kind of wrap it up and make some kind of continuity out of it, people go, wow, great show. Because they takes them away for a half an hour.
Yeah, it's good conversation.
Yeah.
It's true.
So the movie's called Prodigy, and I watched it, it was before we were supposed to interview the first time around. So it's got to be, a couple months now, right? Month and a half?
Right.
Something like that. Really, really good. And I don't mean this to sound like a bad, but I was surprised at how good it was. Because
it's low budget.
Right, sure. Because for an indie kind of a film, it didn't feel like an indie kind of film at all, And I really have been. This is another conversation I get into with actors and with indie filmmakers, which we can get into later. But the line between what Paramount or Universal is putting out and what indies are putting out. The line's getting kind of gray these days. As long as you're not talking about Star Wars or one of the Marvel comic, or James Bond, any of the franchise films, okay. I don't think an indie's going to try to tackle that. But when you're talking about just a love story or a drama something like that. The line is really, really gray these days. What was amazing to me about Prodigy was just the interaction between you and the girl, and her name was
Savannah Lyles.
Savannah Lyles, okay.
And her character's name was Eleanor.
Ellie, right. That was the guts of the film. And what I started thinking, first off, was like, well, it doesn't take $200 million to make a great film, because this is a great film.
Well, thank you.
And the acting was superb. The writing was superb. And to me, it's still the core of a good film. I don't care if you guys just sat there in that room for the entire time. It was the dialogue between you and her that was riveting. It did remind me of, and I'm sure you've heard this comparison before, but it did remind me of The Silence of the Lambs when Jodie Foster went in to see Hannibal in jail, and she sat there for a half an hour interviewing him. It did kind of echo of that a little bit.
Yeah.
But the twist was a little different. The character was a bit different. But I did have to laugh because I was going to say, the two-wheeled dolly and the Jason hockey mask seems to be very standard issue for violent sociopaths, yeah? They seem to use that a lot in the movies.
Yeah.
But yes, just kudos on that film because that was fantastic.
The directors will be happy to hear that. Thank you.
Is it out yet?
It is on Amazon. It's on Amazon. It's been playing well on Amazon. It's on iTunes, Vudu, Google Play. It's going to go to other streaming sites, which I'm not supposed to tell you about yet.
Okay.
So all these NDAs, you sign. So yeah, it's doing well on Amazon. It's holding. I haven't checked recently, but it was around 90% of Rotten Tomatoes.
Right.
And all that. So it's just pretty amazing that it's doing like it's like the little engine that could. It's developed its little following. And there, I guess the genre, I guess it's in that sci-fi thriller genre, not really horror film thrill, but they do. I mean, it's been Alex Hoy, who's Alex and Brian Vidal. They were the co-directors, co-writers, co-producers, and Alex really took on the publicity for the film, and it's he's been very savvy about working the internet and every various web. Here we are talking, but he's been out, promoting it and pitching it and sending screeners or streaming links to the film to reviewers and various podcasters and website reviewers, and he's been. So I think what you're alluding to earlier on, especially not just in the actual filmmaking process, but also in the promotional part of the film, the post-production and selling the film, is that it's become more democratized in our environment because of the internet. Obviously, with digital, everything becomes more affordable. I mean, people are able to shoot with a lot less expensive equipment that tends to look just about as good. Obviously, unless you're doing a Black Panther type movie, it's amazing the quality that you can get, and there's obviously a lot of talent out there as far as camera people and actors and writers and. But I think it does come down to the script. I think that Brian and Alex had spent about 5 years working and honing and trying to get all the bugs out of the script before they actually thought about shooting. So they really prepared well for it. And I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, more than anything else, I think it comes down to what's on the page, the idea, and getting competent people on the set. I mean, he has this fellow, Sonny Johnson, who is the main cinematographer, who's actually lives in Vegas. if anybody out there in Vegas needs a good cameraman, cinematographer, Hisani Johnson is an old friend of Alex and Brian's, and he has a great eye. And we were working, as they say, there's a certain freedom and limitation. And because of the constraints of the actual set, the bulk of the movie is all basically 2 rooms.
Right.
And so when you're that limited, it creates this sort of it's a challenge to how do we make this dynamic, aside from the actual whatever you can create as far as actors, but as far as camera angle and technically in the editing and everything else, that how do you create that sort of momentum and build up the audience's adrenaline. And so, these boys were really smart. I say boys; they're both barely 30, so
they're boys.
I mean, they're old for some of the people I'm working with now. People get out of film school, and it's like, what do we do? But they've been working on the script. They're both in their late 20s, I believe. And Brian Vidal actually works over at Pixar now. He's up in Northern California. He's the man who was in charge of doing all the special effects, which were mostly all practical. Like in the film, you see the chess pieces move, or you see the table flip over, all these crazy things, the pen levitating and spinning around. That's all done practically with wires, fish wires. And he was able to eliminate all that stuff in post. And so he was on the set. Brian was the sort of technical consultant as far as the special effects. And so he knows how to do all that in the computer with CGI and all that. So, and Alex was more the hands-on practical and the actor consultant on the actual set. So they made a good team.
How did you find working with Savannah?
She was great.
Had you worked with her before?
No, not at all. In fact, she was living out in Sedona, Arizona. She was 9 years old. Now I think she's 11. That's how old the film is when we first shot it.
Wow.
So at first, it was written as for a young boy, and they couldn't find a boy they thought that could pull off what they wanted emotionally and everything else. So they opened up the casting to girls, and Savannah walked in and just blew them away. And then I also auditioned, and then we auditioned together, sort of a callback, and they liked our chemistry. I'd never worked with her before, and she was great. She worked really hard. As you can tell from the script, it has a lot of dialogue. I mean, half the film is just her and I bantering with each other, and she had to memorize, not just memorize, but know what she was saying. And so she worked hard. She had an acting coach, and her mom was helping her out and learning what exactly she was saying, why she's saying it, the basic actor questions, and just delivered a performance that was well rehearsed, and we had fun. We had fun. It's interesting. When you work with a child actor, they're very limited because of the work restrictions. They're only allowed to work maybe 6 hours a day. So a lot of my own close-ups were delivered to a stand-in or the camera operator's girlfriend, who had to scooch down to be at the right height, the right eye level for me. So that's the only drawback when you work with a young actor who's a minor, because they're only allowed to be on the set a certain amount of hours.
What was she like out of character? Had to
she
be
was just
completely
a typical
different.
9-year-old.
Yeah.
Had a lot of energy. Sometimes maybe too much energy, because the mom would give her those Frappuccino drinks. But rewarding Savannah for a great series of shots, and then running out, and I said, can you just curb the sugar, caffeine a little bit? She loves acting. She's passionate about it. She's really committed. She recently won an award for it, and I know she was up for an award, sort of like award for the young actor in an independent film. She was up against the young girl from the Florida Project. So she's got good company there. She was totally professional and a great spirit. I'm not just saying that. She was really enthusiastic and a lovely person to work with, really.
I'm just thinking that if she continues on with acting and hones her craft over the next 10, 15 years, what's she going to be like at 40? I mean, she's going to be unbelievable.
Well, maybe Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster had that kind of path.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Hopefully
true.
she will be more Jodie Foster rather than, Macaulay Culkin. I don't know. I mean, people do burn out. I mean, I personally would not wish it on my daughter. My daughter did some commercials and a little bit of acting when she was younger. It's a tough business. But if you can keep your head about you, I think her parents are good parents, and they make sure that she has a full life outside of acting. And there are young actors. Michelle Williams was a young actress who seems her head's on straight, and she's obviously incredibly talented, Michelle Williams. So, I mean, you hope. It's a strange business. It's a really weird business, and I think the thing is to allow them to have a real childhood. I mean, obviously, I think they do have real. I mean, Michelle Williams had to be homeschooled and all that, and other young people talk about not having a full life, but it's possible. I mean, what's his name from Arrested Development was a child actor as well,
Jason Bateman, yeah,
who's obviously is really seems like a great guy who's definitely has a good head on his shoulder. So as long as you stay grounded, I think it's just being grounded and not go all Charlie Sheen or whatever.
Well, there was always that thing about child actors transitioning to adult actors,
right.
And a lot of them did not. Do you know who Paul Peterson is?
No, who's that?
He was the boy in the Donna Reed show back in the late 50s.
Okay.
But he started an organization called A Minor Consideration, which was or is an organization to help child actors who suddenly found themselves unemployed once they hit puberty because they were no longer employable. And, he's got stories about he tried to help River Phoenix on the night that River died. And there were a couple of others, the Rusty Hamer, who was in Make Room for Daddy, who committed suicide. Sure. And there was a couple of others that committed suicide just because, they were huge stars when they were kids. And then as soon as they turned 15 or 16, there was no work. And what did they do? I mean, even Paul Peterson ran into that, where he said that after the Donna Reed show wrapped, he was working as a driver for like a taxi service or something.
Yeah.
And I mean, he just found odd jobs, but he managed to sort of, I don't think he ever acted again, but he managed to at least, put food on the table. But yeah, I mean, you can count almost on one hand the ones that transitioned well.
It's a brutal business.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. I mean, you just don't know. I mean, look at someone like Mickey Dolenz. It was a great interview I was watching, or a podcast with Mickey Dolenz talking about, he was up for the Henry Winkler Fonzie role. And even though Winkler talks about seeing Mickey Dolenz in the audition and said, oh, there's no way I'm going to get it because, Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees is here. But
I can't imagine him as Fonzie. I cannot imagine him as Fonzie.
I mean, obviously Winkler was great as Fonzie, iconic. But Mickey Dolenz said that, he realized at a certain point that he's going to have to figure out another way of putting bread on the table. And he became a director, and he directed a lot of theater for a while. And until the sort of Monkey reunion tour started happening for him. And I think you have to reinvent yourself at some point if you're not getting the work. I always talk about if you had that kind of stardom, it seems like you could go back to doing theater if you ever had that theater. Maybe some of these people never wanted to do theater, but I love theater, and I know that certain regional theater would love to have former star. I mean, people, what's his name, who played in MASH, these people are not child actors, but actors who became stars of a series, and then they don't find roles anymore, and they usually go back to doing theater, or they can find regional theater and at least exercise their chops and hopefully get work. Everyone does that. I mean, Laurie Metcalf comes from a theater, and she talked about how Roseanne, the original incarnation of Roseanne, left, and then she went back and did primarily theater for mostly. She hadn't done any films except until Lady Bird came her way. She went back and doing theater for a long time. So I think if you love the theater, I think you can always find work. It may not be the sort of, star profile type work you're used to, having that lifestyle. But if you love, there's a cliche, like Meisner would say, love the art in yourself, not yourself in the art. If you really love what you're doing, and if you find a way of just exercising it somehow, wherever it be, doing theater, there's ways of finding a way of expressing your creative force. There's got to be a way of finding that. If you love doing what you're doing, you write, or you go back and do theater or something, but you have to find a way of expressing yourself, and I think it's just it can be very depressing if you're that level of stardom and suddenly you don't have it.
You gave me a great visual when you were talking about Mickey Dolenz and then about the theater, and all I could think of was, could you imagine Mickey Dolenz in something like Death of a Salesman? Or, I just don't know if it would be credible, because people would just be looking at him going, wasn't he in the Monkees?
Well, maybe not that, but I could definitely see him doing Arsenic and Old Lace.
Okay, he could do. Yeah,
he had comedic timing, and there's so many plays and so many different genres. I could see him doing a lot of things. I think Mickey Dolenz I loved him. I'm talking when I was 5 or 6, 7 years old. I loved Mickey Dolenz, and I could definitely see him being very funny in certain roles, in sort of a Bill Murray type comedy. I could see him playing a lot of different characters. Maybe not Death of a Salesman. I couldn't see Bill Murray doing Death of a Salesman.
Well, no, but I did see. Did you see the one where he played Roosevelt?
Yeah, I did see that.
I thought that was pretty decent.
On the Hudson, something on the Hudson.
Hyde Park on the Hudson, right?
Right, with Laura Linney.
Yeah,
he was pretty good.
Yeah,
he was pretty good. I saw him also in Razor's Edge. Remember that? Yeah. Where he did the Tide Power. It wasn't so great. Groundhog Day is one of the greatest films ever made as far as comedies, for sure. But he's an actor that, in Groundhog Day, you just can't imagine anyone else doing a Groundhog Day.
No.
And so, just that alone, that's up there with Some Like It Hot as two of the greatest comedies ever made, I think.
Well, and Caddyshack, I would throw that in there, too.
Which one?
Caddyshack. Yeah,
well, have you seen Caddyshack recently? See, you're probably closer to my age. It doesn't age too well. Back when you're pre-adolescent or something, it's the funniest film in the world. I think if you're 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, Caddyshack is the height of humor. But you watch it now, and it doesn't age very well.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So, okay, I'm 56. I don't mind
so we're about the same age. So I'm just saying it. I love Rodney Dangerfield. I thought his casting of Rodney Dangerfield was just so brilliant.
Maybe I should watch it again, and I might redefine my terms on it and say that it's maybe a bit juvenile, but there were some funny moments.
Brilliantly cast Caddyshack. There's a book out now about the making of Caddyshack.
Oh, I didn't know.
Because it was Harold Ramis's first directorial debut. It was his first film.
Oh, okay.
And how it was just a mess. As far as the editor really put it together, because it was just, and it was the height of all the drug use. Everybody was doing cocaine, and it was just this constant party. And it was initially a love story between these people that worked at the Caddyshack, and then they hired all these improv actors, Murray, Chevy Chase, and all these actors that would just go off, and they created hours and hours and hours of this crazy lunacy that an editor had to come in and figure out a way of making this a cohesive 2-hour film. And, Rodney Dangerfield never acted in a film before. And it's a very funny story because Harold Ramis tells it how he was on the set. Originally, they thought of Don Rickles for the role.
Oh, God.
But, and then they saw Dangerfield was doing all these appearances on the late night Johnny Carson and thought he was just perfect. And they cast him. And so he's on the set. He's supposed to be doing his first scene where he comes into the pro shop, where he has this scene with Ted Knight. And he's talking about, crazy, what kind of hat is this? If you had a hat like this, I'm sure they throw in a bowl of soup or, whatever. They would say action and nothing happens. Okay, and they would do it again. Action, nothing happens. And he says, Rodney, is everything okay? When I call action, he goes, oh, that means I do my bit? He goes, yeah. That's when you do your bit. From that point on, Harold Ramis would say, okay, Rodney, time to do your bit. He never knew the word action that was supposed to be a scene. He would just come in and improvise. And every time he did his bit, he'd come up with a new line. Like he would go home. He was so horrified at his performance because nobody was laughing. He was used to that immediate stand-up performing
right in front of an audience.
And so every night he was so neurotic. He was telling everybody, goes, I'm going to get fired. Nobody's laughing. And he would go back to his hotel and start writing like 50 other lines that he would improvise. It was supposedly a nightmare for the editors because every take he'd do a different line. But anyway, as a child, I mean, you and I, when we saw that film in junior high school, whatever, we thought it was the greatest film ever made. I mean, it was just fantastic. But it is one of those films where like it has bits. It has the Bill Murray bit where he does that monologue about the Dalai Lama,
right? And the golf balls, the golf ball washer,
right, golf ball washer. Chevy Chase doing his talking about drugs and just silliness.
It's interesting about that cast because you had such a diverse group of comedians. Everything from Dangerfield to Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase, to me, was always a bit of an enigma because, to me, I don't think he was ever acting. That's just who he was. That kind of dry sort of... Because that was the same person he was on in Vacation. It was the same person he was on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
He never changed. And so, with somebody like that, to me, I just always think, oh, that must be just them. That's just how they are. Not to say he wasn't funny.
That's part of his brilliance, I think. I mean, you could say the same thing about Henry Fonda. I mean, he seemed like the same guy.
That's true. That's true. And Jimmy Stewart, I suppose, too.
Right. I mean, Jimmy Stewart, though, is interesting. Both of those guys, and here we go, I'm going off on tangents, but they both attempted to play against their type. They played some dark figures. There are some. I remember seeing some westerns. I mean, Once Upon a Time in America, the Sergio Leone film, Henry Fonda played a really bad guy, like a really bad guy, and supposedly the American audiences hated that because it was like not the Henry Fonda they had come to love,
right?
And I think Tom Hanks has that same issue. He doesn't want to play a bad guy or unsympathetic character because the audience expects, this Mr. the Great American Dad type,
Forrest
figure. This lovely person from Philadelphia or all those films where he just is the kind of guy you want to hang out with. I was watching this. You ever see this weird film that Paul Schrader did where about Bob Crane, the actor from Hogan's Heroes?
I did see that.
What is it called? What's it called? Autofocus.
Autofocus. Yeah, I did see that.
And Hanks's real wife plays the wife in that with Greg Kinnear. Rita Wilson.
Yeah, okay.
Plays, right. And I was thinking how interesting it would have been to have Tom Hanks play the Bob Crane role. And I know that was a low-budget film, and so Greg Kinnear was fine in it. But you take the persona that Tom Hanks has carefully cultivated in our public perception, and you put that as Bob Crane in a sort of seedy, dark, he's got this perverted side. It
Right.
would totally mess with the audience. It would be so wonderful because the audience has this preconceived idea, like Bob Crane had for Hogan's Heroes. Here's this lovable guy on the set of Hogan's Heroes. Nobody possibly suspects that he has this dark, weird side. And so I think that's the great thing. If and I think that's the problem with being a huge star like that. I mean, Kirk Douglas, his famous story. Here I am going off on tangent, but there's a famous story about Kirk Douglas played, Vincent Van Gogh in Lust for Life, right?
Yeah.
And John Wayne supposedly said to Kirk Douglas, he said, Kirk, why are you playing this role? He's weak. He's sniveling. He's this desperate guy. He's like, the audience wants us to play heroes. Why are you playing this deranged loser? And Kirk was like, well, Duke, I'm an actor. I want to have a full range. I mean, I'm an actor. I want to play all different types of characters. So, some people love the fact that you're always having to play this hero thing. But, I think at a certain point you have so much money. Why don't you mess with your image and try to do something that's completely out of the box?
True. I'm trying to think now. All right, I'll just ask it as a question then. Who do you think that's around today that can flip back and forth between the good guy and the bad guy and can do both equally well?
I mean, there are great actors out there. I mean, obviously Sean Penn and John Malkovich and Gary Oldman. Those come to mind. I mean, as far as good and bad, I mean, I guess Daniel Day-Lewis.
Okay.
There Will Be Blood. He was obviously dark figure in, and he's a great actor, obviously.
Anthony Hopkins comes to mind for me.
Yeah, Anthony Hopkins. I'm just thinking of people that can play the consummate good guy, but I'm drawing a blank these days. Willem Dafoe was in that Florida Project. His very sympathetic character, but obviously we know he can play a dark figure. I think someone like Michael Fassbender, who played Steve Jobs, goes back and forth. Obviously, I'm just thinking of guys, but there are obviously amazing actresses out there as well. Was there two
Steve Jobs movies? Because I'm thinking of the one with Ashton Kutcher.
Oh, yeah, there was another one with Michael Fassbender.
Oh, okay, because I just watched the Ashton Kutcher one. I thought it was good.
Yeah, I didn't see that. Yeah, I mean, Oldman.
Gary Oldman's a great actor, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, he plays dark really well.
Do you remember him as Sid Vicious in Sid and Nancy?
Of course.
Yeah.
I thought he was amazing. And in those early films, I liked him so much better. We played the playwright Joe Orton.
Oh, yeah,
One of his first movies with Alfred Molina. Now, Molina's a great actor as well. Oh, my gosh, he's incredible. He's a guy that can do anything, Alfred Molina.
What do you think of Keanu Reeves?
I think in certain parts he's really effective. I liked him in John Wick. I mean, nobody could do John Wick better than Keanu Reeves, right? Or The Matrix.
Yeah.
I had a hard time with him as a doctor in that Nicholson.
As good as it or Something's Got to Give. Something's Got to Give.
Yeah. Greg Kinnear is a good actor. He plays sympathetic. I think now he plays too sympathetic, but I think he can play a dark side. Keanu Reeves, I don't know. What do you think of Keanu Reeves?
I think he's kind of perplexing to me because he's like an A-list Hollywood actor. He's this huge star, but I haven't seen a lot of depth in the guy.
Yeah, he's supposed to be a real mensch. He's a really great guy too. He gives a lot of his money.
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard he's a very super guy.
Super guy. He actually does really good work with his money.
There's another one that's also a musician. He's got a band.
Right.
Or had a band called Dog Star. But as far as an actor, I mean, he's just kind of one of these people that has like one level.
Right. He's a good-looking guy.
He's a good-looking guy, right.
There's a lot of people like that, though. I mean, there's people who I think they're just attractive to look at. So
that's good enough.
The camera loves them. You know, I don't know. I mean, they're not as versatile as. I mean, the older cliche actors like Gary Cooper. I mean, here was a guy, Gary Cooper. The camera just loved Gary Cooper. The camera never loved any actor more than Gary Cooper. And you look at something like High Noon, and or The Fountainhead. And he's just brilliant in it. And it's like he's doing nothing. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's film acting. I don't know. I mean, Gary Cooper, you watch a movie like High Noon, and he's surrounded, and Kirk Douglas is in it. Not Kirk,
Lloyd Bridges.
Lloyd Bridges is in the movie. And Lloyd Bridges comes from a more what so-called respectable theater background, and every scene that Cooper's in just blows everybody off the screen. He's just doing so little. And, you know, some like Robert Mitchum, I don't think was a great actor, but the same thing with Out of the Past. You watch Robert Mitchum against Kirk Douglas. Mitchum seems to be doing nothing, and Mitchum is just so compelling to watch.
True,
and I think he's a so good-looking guy. You know, Robert Mitchum. My mom was part of the Robert Mitchum fan club. Her and her best friend as teenagers. Wow. You know, he was one of the first major stars to get busted for marijuana too.
Right. Yeah.
And there was something about him, the bad guy. He was the bad boy, right? Yeah. He got arrested and didn't give a shit. He escaped from a chain gang. You know, he's a guy who never trained as an actor at all. I mean, but he was just so natural. But you could tell, like, later on in his life when he started being in other films, how limited he was. He was in a film called The Yakuza, directed by Sidney Pollack. And I remember seeing an interview with Pollack and saying it was very hard to try to kind of push Mitchum to another level as far as his depth. But he did it as much as he could. It's an interesting film, The Yakuza. Because Pollack also went to Neighborhood Playhouse where I went. I mean, a lot of David Mamet went there, and so people who started off thinking they were going to be actors, you know, Mamet obviously became a playwright, director, and Pollack, one of the great directors, and talked about working with Mitchum, you know, because he's such an icon. Oh, yeah.
Hey, Richard, we got to wrap this. We're already running way over here.
Sorry. I've got a life too, man. So, Douglas, it's been a pleasure. I mean, we hardly talked about Prodigy, but.
Well, I think we got it in there. We left it enough that we didn't tell about the story. So.
No. As you say, it has a Hannibal Lecter
ish kind feel of about it.
It's a military compound where a young girl is held prisoner, and I'm brought in as a therapist to try to save her. And, people can stream it on Amazon, and will be on other streaming sites very soon. So
super. And just real quick, are you working on anything right now? Anything new?
Right now, I've got there's going to be another untitled graphic anthology series. It's going to be on Netflix, directed by Tim Miller, who directed Deadpool. And I voiced one of the main characters on that. So I'm not even sure what it's going to be called, but that's going to be soon.
Well, maybe you can come back.
That'd be terrific. I'd love to. Yeah.
We can do a part 2 of this.
Sounds good.
All right.
Great.
Well, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was great talking to you. I love talking about film. I know we could have gone on for hours.
Forever. Well, thank you, Douglas. It's been a real pleasure as well.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guest, Richard Neal. This is Douglas Coleman saying goodbye. To the mile, you've got to run, not walk. To give a sermon, you've got to preach, not talk. To reach the mountain, you've got to climb, not dream. To say you love me, you've got to speak, not scream. All the way on love, can't do it just halfway. All the way on love, it's a pain.